Welcome to the Jurassic Park-Cast, the Jurassic Park podcast, where guests chat with me about Michael Crichton's 1990 novel, Jurassic Park, and also Not That Too. My name's Ryan Rogers, and I'm a big dumb Jurassic Park fan. Welcome to episode 32, Control, recorded on September 21st. I just finished closing up the pool out back, kind of. Cleaning off the covers anyhow. Thanks for joining me today. A continued thank you to Christoph Oakes of Snail, Snale. You can check out his incredible album on Spotify and Bandcamp, and today's intro is from the song Atom Age Vampire Cat in the Brain, and our outro is Hummingbird. Moving on to our corrections from the last episode, I owe you all an apology. I knew full well that when I was apologizing for yelling, "Hey, stop the car!" while you were driving, because that was so distracting, that also playing a police siren during the apology was tantamount to a jerk move. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that. Please forgive me. Another correction, it turns out that when I told my kids that they can hold it till we get home, that was a mistake. I told them about these Alaskan wood frogs that have been observed to hold their urine for up to 8 months. And I'm sorry to my kids, we should have cloned you with some wood frog DNA, just a little, to make car rides a bit easier, but we didn't. Sorry, kids. And when my guest, Dr. Adam Pritchard, said in episode 30, Control, we've got too many episodes named Control now, that he was surprised that Crichton included the Colovosaurus as one of the animals listed in the park, and I didn't say anything, but I kind of felt like I knew right away that I was unfamiliar that there was a Colovosaurus in the novel. I couldn't figure out where that was coming from. And so here we are a few weeks later, and Dr. Pritchard is still fascinating me and teaching me new things about this book. So Colovosaurus is in the novel Jurassic Park, but it's not in all of the novels of Jurassic Park. What? Dr. Pritchard's version of the novel was printed in 1990 and is the hardcover. Somehow, early in the novel's run, someone snuck into the manuscript, replaced Microceratops with Colovosaurus on InGen's list, but not in the rest of the novel. So when the Microceratops are jumping around in the trees over the Mesozoic Jungle River, they're not Colovosaurus, nor could they have been a Colovosaurus, but it is on the list. Just on these lists, it's so strange. Why would they do that? Moving on to dinosaur news. This September, a new paper came out about another abelisaur in Argentina called Alamgasum nubilis, Brachyrostron abelisaurid from the Portezuelo Formation of Patagonia, Argentina. And it gives us another big, neat, short-armed, horny theropod marching around. The paper is pretty upfront that abelisaurs are abundant and known from all over the late Cretaceous of Gondwana. So this isn't surprising, but it's interesting to continue to observe the diversity of these creatures. Abelisaurids appear in almost all regions of Gondwana and in all stages, except for the Coniacian, in which they are globally unknown, says the paper. Alamgasum nubilis was uncovered from the Portezuelo Formation of the Turonian to the Coniacian age, and the holotype is of a subadult that had achieved sexual maturity, says the paper. I don't know what bone you need to find to know that. Quote, this taxon is based on several axial and appendicular elements and is diagnosed by the presence of a marked pattern of rugosity on the lateral surface of the fibula and a dorsoventrally deep lateral wall of the calcaneum. So it had like a fancy lower leg and ankle, I think is what that's saying. Some of its caudal vertebrae are morphologically slightly different from any other abelisaurid. It's been run through the phylogenetic analysis machine and recovered as a, quote, unstable taxon within Brachyrostra, given that it was recovered as a sister taxon of Furuleusoria, or in several positions within this clade. So a Brachyrostran abelisaur would be one that is more closely related to Carnotaurus than it is to Abelisaurus, and is known to have had a short snout. In fact, abelisaurs are distinctly short-snouted and have bony crests above their eyes, have extensive grooves and splits as skull ornamentations, stocky hind limbs, and ridiculously small forelimbs, like a salamander's arm on an iguana. These animals could range in size from 17 to 30 feet long. Although its precise phylogenetic position is a little problematic, its identification, quote, is important because it is the first abelisaurid from the Turonian-Coniacian interval, and it increases the diversity of this theropod family at a time of marked turnover in the tetrapod fauna of South America, global climate change, and mass extinction events recorded worldwide in the marine realm. And because our heroes have been finding dinosaur eggs in the south fields of Jurassic Park recently, here's some more news about dinosaur nesting. A New Year's paper from January 1st, 2022 named Upper Cretaceous dinosaur nesting colony preserved in abandoned crevasse splay deposits, Wi Island, South Korea. Maybe it's Y Island? W-I. set out to employ a taphonomic perspective to improve understanding of nesting behavior. Based on a series of sedimentological characteristics, the preserved sediment they were excavating could, quote, be classified into 3 facies associations. 1, ephemeral fluvial channels. 2, crevasse splay lobes. And 3, floodplains. The researchers identified 3 species of eggs called Propagulithis widowensis, Reticululithis acicularis, and Enigma ulithis vesicularis, and it's said that these egg species were frequently found together. The most common eggs were the Propagulithis, which were preserved in clutches and characterized by numerous closely spaced pore canals, indicating that the eggs were buried during oviposition, which increased their likelihood of being preserved, which is good. Whatever was laying these eggs preferred these ephemeral fluvial channels for extended periods, says the report. I don't know what else to say about this one. Fossil eggs, they're in the ground, sometimes in clutches. Maybe I'll skip egg news next time. I don't know about that. All right, with the corrections and dinosaur news out of the way, please let me introduce you to my special guest this episode. All right, I'd like to introduce today my special guest. It's executive director and co-founder for the Institute for Liberal Studies in our nation's capital, Ottawa, as Fox News host Tucker Carlson calls it.
Ottawa.
Welcome to the show, Matt Bufton.
Pleasure to be here.
So Matt and I met in Wellington, New Zealand in 1998, launching the nation's 4th most popular guitar-based digibongo a cappella rap-funk comedy folk duo. And our act was picked up by the BBC and became New Zealand's 3rd highest exported good in 2006, behind sheep and goat meat, and tied for 3rd with the Blu-ray release of The Event Horizon, which featured the chilling performance of New Zealand's 4th greatest export, Sam Neill. And that was a whirlwind tour for us, but I think we really hit our stride after HBO gave us a very low-paying gig for a few years, and after winning all the Grammys for Best Comedy Albums, we went our separate ways. Where do you keep your Grammy?
I like to keep it on my shelf. I mean, it's an audio podcast. People can't see it, but if they could see behind me on the bookshelf right now, they would see just a row of Grammys from that famous year.
Mm-hmm. You have to remind me, was it you who was a big fan of the Flight of the Conchords?
I am a big fan of the Flight of the Conchords.
All right. Have you, Jermaine Clement has made a very interesting career for himself, and he's hard to spot because he's like a chameleon in some ways, but you can always hear that there's something very special whenever the performance starts coming out of him. And he's had some wild roles, and I know your daughter's still young, but have you gotten into Moana yet?
We have not, no, but I'm always looking for good kids programming, so I'd love to hear about it.
Well, he plays a crab, and like as soon as he just has like one scene, he sings a song, he beats a few people up, and that's it. But the song is enchanting. It's just amazing what this guy can do with his voice. And if you haven't seen it, check that out. It's incredible. You probably just
look for that.
Probably find it on YouTube. You don't have to get the whole film, I don't think, but it's David Bowie-esque. You'll do a double take when whatever the audio version of a double take is. It's awesome.
I love that. I feel like right now 10% of my life is trying to find things for our 3-year-old to watch that I can tolerate having on in the background.
Okay, so Peppa Pig won't cut it.
Not big fans of Peppa Pig. Shaun the Sheep, if any viewers are looking for these similar things, Shaun the Sheep is a wonderful sort of claymation style show from the UK that is dialogue free.
Okay.
And so you can sort of look at it, and it's slapstick enough that it's sort of enjoyable, but you avoid the loud noises, the earworm songs, and the squeaky voices that so many kids shows have.
Yeah, the Wiggles is a bit much. The old Wiggles we have on VHS, and actually those are pretty good. The new ones, I guess they're okay. Dinosaur Train was all right. It sounds like Shaun the Sheep is quite a bit like Pingu. Did you ever watch Pingu?
I vaguely remember. I mean, what Shaun the Sheep really is, if you remember Wallace and Gromit from the 90s, it's the same production studio. It's actually a bit of a spin-off from that. So that's very much what that is like. And yeah, I will say the other one is you can find a lot of very old Sesame Street on YouTube. I highly recommend this. Go back to like when we were kids in the early 80s, and it's much less annoying. There's no Elmo. So you can avoid the Elmo voice entirely by getting your Sesame Street on YouTube and going back far enough.
Mm-hmm. That's a hot tip.
If nothing else, your listeners will have benefited from that.
Yes, very good. So here's a piece of Jurassic Park-Cast history that nobody knows except for maybe you. When I was first considering producing a podcast about the novel Jurassic Park, I didn't have the first idea what to do, and I only knew one person who had anything to do with podcasts, and that was Matt. And that was you. Do you remember me popping into your Facebook Messenger with an odd inquiry about podcasts?
I mean, I guess I've sort of forgotten it, but now you mention it, I do remember that you asked something. I forget even what the question was, but I have a vague memory of that conversation.
I'm sure it was. It opened with a soft lead, and then had built into a direct inquiry, and then I think you're very forthcoming about using Podbean. And so if Podbean's listening, Matt should receive a credit or a bonus or something for the referral.
I wish it was. I wish I could say we were influential enough that I could really monetize that referral, but I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to.
I think you had to go to your website and then click the link and use the promo code, and then something like that ends up being some sort of a fraction of a Bitcoin for you somewhere.
Yeah. A fraction of a Bitcoin at some point.
That's right. Well, I appreciate the tips, and you're probably regretting it now that you wound up having to be a guest here. So.
I mean, I'm enjoying it. Among other things, it got me to read the novel Jurassic Park, which I had never done before, and I quite enjoyed.
That's so wild. All right, so we'll start with podcasting. The Curious Task I listen to because I like you. And I don't know tremendously much about libertarianism, although I have listened to so many of the episodes that I should. Can you describe, I guess, what the show is about and what your role is? What does an executive producer do with The Curious Task?
So the Curious Task is a podcast about politics, philosophy, and economics from a classical liberal perspective, which is sort of what the organization, the Institute for Liberal Studies, is interested in, this sort of study and discussion based in classical liberalism, which is a political philosophy that puts a very high degree on individual freedom and autonomy. So within that, we interview a variety of guests. Many of them are academics. We touch on a lot of different topics. It's sort of an hour-long conversational podcast format. I will mention, for people who might be sort of vaguely interested, but also like I'm maybe not into so much the academic stuff, our most popular episode is number 100, where we talk to economist Tyler Cowan about why Scarborough, Ontario is one of the best ethnic dining experiences in the world. So if you want some hot dining tips, if nothing else, you can check out episode 100 for that.
All right.
And then it's just the question of what an executive producer does. Not a whole lot. So I have some colleagues who do the interviewing, all the interview prep, the production, and everything that involves in getting it online and available for people to listen to. And I sort of pop in from time to time with ideas for guests or topics, and sort of work at that very high level, which is my understanding similar to movie credits. I don't have any movie industry experience, but my understanding is like the executive producer tag is someone who maybe gave some money or is like a cousin of the director or something like that. And the actual producers are the people who do the work of getting you to see the movie. So that feels a very appropriate description of my role on that podcast. But I'm sometimes a guest, and I'm biased. I think we produce a pretty good podcast.
It's pretty cool, and I liken it to kind of like when you have a news podcast. You just kind of come out of it saying, I feel like I understand things a little bit more today about what's going on. And I remember, in particular, because you guys are based in Ottawa, and maybe not only because you're based in Ottawa, the episodes that pertain to the Emergencies Act I thought was very good. And obviously some discussions on the protests in the winter outside of Parliament. I think were very interesting. You get so many people that are one-sided on it, and they get so politicized over it. It was very interesting to have more of a fundamental question about how this all works, and the Emergencies Act, that was crazy.
Yeah, good. I mean, I think that's a fair description of our goal is to have people who listen to it think that they learn something, they understand something a little bit better, and even if it's maybe a position the guest might take they don't agree with, that they understand the position of that guest. So it's not so much an exercise in convincing as an exercise in understanding.
There's a whole lesson to be learned about listening that I think we all should listen to more. So The Curious Task is a strange name to me. I suppose it has roots in classical documents like The Invisible Hand or The Silver Bullet or something like that. Where does The Curious Task find its roots?
So it's more recent. The curious task is a quote from the economist Friedrich Hayek, who was born in, I think, 1899, thereabouts that time, and lived into the 1990s. And he once described economics in the words, the curious task of economics is to demonstrate to men how little they really know about what they imagine they can design. And I was thinking, as I thought about that, I think it has some carryover to the novel Jurassic Park.
Okay.
In terms of Hammond's sort of hubris in designing the park. But Hayek was, sort of, to him, that was a condemnation of central planning. Mm-hmm. The idea that you know exactly what society should look like, what should be produced, who should get certain things. And he considered economics not to be the very mathematical field that many of us now think of economics as, but this idea that information is diffuse, lots of people know things, and so rather than having someone in Ottawa deciding how many shoes of what style need to be sold in Vancouver, that information is instead, in the head of someone who's an entrepreneur in Vancouver and is making or buying shoes and reselling them. And so, Hayek really, a lot of his sort of intellectual project was critiquing central planning and what he referred to as scientism, which again, I think plays actually quite well into this novel. Mm-hmm. The idea that we can use science to solve all of the problems in society, he rejected. And, he was most intellectually active in the years after World War II. And there's a big planning push that comes out of the Second World War. That, okay, we had the government is in charge. The Americans in particular really just ramped up production. They nationalized all of these factories and industry, and they got the big job done, which was winning the war. Mm-hmm. Can we apply that sort of philosophy and exercise to the peace and actually just plan the economy that way? So you see, in the UK, a lot of nationalizing of industries coming out after the Second World War, and Hayek was an opponent of those things. And so the curious task is our little homage to what I think is a saying that's got a lot to it. And if people are interested in more, episode 40 is with Professor Pete Vetke, and we actually just ask him the question, what is the curious task of economics?
Okay.
He's a Hayek scholar who can answer a lot of those questions better than I could.
Right on. That's so fascinating. So, as you'd mentioned, you had not read Jurassic Park in advance of my request to coming on the show, but you were interested all the same. What made you accept the invite to come on the show and then go read the novel? Why did you decide that was something you wanted to do?
Yeah, well, first of all, I rarely turn down a chance to be interviewed. So whenever I can, I'm very happy to come and talk, and especially on podcasts. Mm-hmm. I'm interested in how other people are doing podcasts. I'll admit there's some self-interest here that one way to pick up new podcast listeners is by going on podcasts. Mm-hmm. So pretty much anytime I can, I accept an invite to come on someone else's podcast. I know they'll mention that we have one and we can talk about it a little bit. But also, I hadn't read Jurassic Park. I had read some other Michael Crichton novels. It's almost a little weird that I think if I had read this, when I was 14, I really would have enjoyed it. I'm not entirely sure why I didn't. But I enjoyed the book, and I will say I enjoyed the book far more than I enjoyed the movie. I think it's a great novel, and at the risk of offending the host here, the movie's so-so. The special effects are great, but a lot of the rest of it, I could take it or leave it.
Well, what I can fully appreciate is that there's something special about reading it for the first time, but also reading it for the first time, but not being a kid. And you've got like these fresh but also mature eyes that you can look at the novel with that I don't know a lot of people can do. So I'm fascinated to hear what you think. I can't imagine seeing Jurassic Park in 1993 as an adult, and maybe we look at it with less joy, right? Like maybe its warts are far more evident to an adult when they watch that movie versus every kid came out of the theater, with wishing that it could be a dinosaur. Yeah. Like you just walked out of the theater with your arms crunched up like a Tyrannosaurus and say, I'm going to be a dinosaur now. Or maybe that was just me, but... But to be an adult, I guess adults could come out of the theater that way too. So with your first impressions on the novel, were there surprises or just problems that you saw in it?
Yeah, I guess there's a lot more depth than I thought. So I will say that right off the bat, that when you said I'm doing a podcast on Jurassic Park, I thought, well, I could see how you could do like an episode of a podcast to talk about the novel Jurassic Park, but to do the whole podcast always about Jurassic Park. But then reading it, I realized there's all of these little things that you can go deeper in. I've listened to some of the back episodes and seen how you guys have done that. I think it's really interesting. The thing probably that struck me the most was the way that Michael Crichton puts in what I would consider a fair bit of commentary that I agree with. The stuff about chaos theory, the problems about trying to plan a very complex system. And yet, he starts off with the introduction, which I think is perhaps what made you think of talking to me about this, where he's calling for more regulation for these things. As if the fact that if there had just been a government department that had been in charge of overseeing Jurassic Park, then Hammond would have avoided all of the problems. Whereas to me, all of the problems that happened could have very easily happened in a government facility or one that was regulated by the government.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Any characters that jump to mind that would have been like, you go, hey, that guy wasn't in the movie. Who's this guy?
Well, I saw the movie not in theaters, but probably shortly after it came out, on VHS at the time at the video rental store, and it didn't make a big impression on me. I mean, I thought I thought the special effects were good, but I would have been about 15 at that time, so perhaps just a little too old to just be entirely absorbed by cool dinosaur special effects. I mean, if I'd been 8 years old, I probably would have been like, oh my God, the dinosaurs are so cool. But the rest of the movie didn't leave a big impression on me, so I didn't remember much about the characters, except I did have in my memory what they looked like and who played them. And so I was interested in when I started reading the novel, there's certain characters who I don't think I knew by name who played them. But like when I started reading the Ian Malcolm character, I'm like, oh yeah, this has got to be the Jeff Goldblum character. And Nedry, the computer programmer, right? He's Wayne Knight, but I just think of Newman from Seinfeld. And I'm like, oh yeah, this is like the Newman character. And so I don't know if Crichton maybe thought of actors who should play these characters, because I know it was turned into a movie very quickly after publication. And I sort of wonder, did he show up to Steven Spielberg's office and say, I've got an actor who I think would be perfect for this role, or was that just someone else in the casting department? But I found that very interesting.
Grant is portrayed, bearded, wearing a Hawaiian shirt, cowboy boots, barrel-chested fella. He's certainly different than what's portrayed in the movie. And I wouldn't take anything away from Sam Neill, because I think he was tender enough with the role that it worked out just fine. But he's portrayed different. And then I think Malcolm is supposed to be very tall and bald.
Okay, so I didn't even catch up on the baldness, but I guess probably it was the all dressed in black.
Yeah.
Which I feel like that matches my mental image of Jeff Goldblum outside of Jurassic Park. So that one really jumped out, and then the slavishness of Nedry, I thought was interesting. And I will say, just Malcolm, I found quite an interesting character because of his sort of criticisms of you can't plan this thing, it's too difficult, the chaos theory. I didn't really know very much about chaos theory before. I've tried to read a little bit online about it since. I still don't think I understand it very well. But the idea of unpredictability in a system, again, fits with some of my other interests in terms of the debates that Hayek was in were in part things like, okay, we have these very powerful computers now, and if not now, then soon we can just punch all the economic needs of a country into a computer, and it will tell us how many running shoes to make and what sizes they should be and how much they should cost and where they will be sold. And especially in the Soviet Union, this is a way that they imagined an economy could be run. And maybe Hayek is sort of there, Ian Malcolm off the side going, it's too complex, it'll never work, you can't plan it this way.
That's right. It should at least be an experiment. It shouldn't be this delivery. They shouldn't say we got all the answers. They should be experimenting to seeing what works and what doesn't, as opposed to like that seems like the scientific process. They skipped a step. This went right to the, our conclusions are what we expected, and there was no experiment involved at all. So
yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, in a way, that's sort of the way that people like Hayek would think of a competitive market economy, a capitalist economy, if you like, that there's constantly these experiments going on. Someone decides to open that shoe store in Vancouver, and maybe they've got a good idea of what shoes people in the area want and how to get them in the store, and that experiment is successful. But the lesson there is not that, okay, you take that store and you put them in every city on every street corner across Canada, because it's particular to that time and place. And so, their business is constantly going out of business because they were wrong about what it is that people wanted. And sometimes it's through no fault of their own. A lot of places went bankrupt during COVID, not because they made a mistake, except that it was just that the societal and market conditions were not what they expected to be. I mentioned Pete Betke a few minutes ago. He wrote his dissertation on the Soviet Union and has something like a fact that more businesses went bankrupt in New York City in 1978 than in the entire history of the Soviet Union.
Wow.
And so it's this constant experimentation, which I think people like Hayek would describe as part of a vibrant economy that is not going to be present in that sort of planned economy.
So you're absolutely right. I approached you to be on the podcast because of the first chapters in the book, and there's so much in conversation about intrusive governmental agencies, frustrating regulations and approvals, and all kinds of problems that businesses face getting their products to market, and that feels like a libertarian perspective to that there should be more freedoms involved, and but at the same time the novel opens with these accusations in the introduction saying that unbridled capitalism is going to literally change the face of the earth for the worse. So the capitalist in this novel is shown in kind of a poor light. Hammond isn't a hero by any stretch of the means, and it's a common sense to do frivolous things with science, that because ethical things are too much of a hassle and it's too regulated, it's too hard to make money doing important things. So it's a fantasy that doesn't really, if you think about it too hard, doesn't work, but it works for the novel. But I guess from your perspective, what's an economic look at what's being argued for in the novel look like to you?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, this novel feels a bit like one of those ink blots where you look at it and what you see reveals more about yourself than what's actually in the ink blot. So, like you mentioned the part about not doing the thing that is good, which is Hammond sort of says it would be silly to try and cure cancer, because if you could, you'll be forced to give it away for free. And so you do something like build a dinosaur park, because then you won't be forced to give it away for free.
Naturally, yes.
And I think Crichton writes that as a condemnation of capitalism. And this is what we get with the capitalist economy. But I read it as a condemnation of government, right? If we let the market play its course, there's a huge financial reward to curing cancer. When the government comes in and wants to punish the person who has cured cancer by taking away the profits that they would have earned, that's a problem with government. Now, I don't think it's the case that someone could cure cancer and is not doing it because they're worried about what's going to happen with the government, making them give it away. But I think it does sort of reduce the incentives on the margins. I think I've read some things about how vaccine technology was underinvested in the years leading up to COVID. Now I think there's probably a lot more investment in vaccine development than there was. But leading up to that, there was this idea that if you had a vaccine for a disease, especially in the third world, that you would be pressured to give it away, which is what we saw a lot with things like medication for AIDS and HIV. You make a breakthrough, and then there's just this massive both government and social pressure that it's very expensive. People in Africa who need it can't afford it, and so you've got to give it away for free or at a very low cost. And if you're the CEO of a pharmaceutical company, it's nice to do good things for people, but you need to make money to stay in business. And so not that you like sit on a cure for cancer, but maybe you just don't look at it as closely and spend as much time on it as you might. So I think Hammond makes a really interesting point. But to me, the point that ends up being made is the exact opposite one from what I think Crichton intends when he writes that.
Mm-hmm. That's very interesting. The Rorschach analogy is fascinating. I like that.
Yeah.
So furthermore, in the novel, as a synopsis, the introduction is an essay by Crichton that outlines that biotechnology and genetic engineering have been rushed with furious haste and for profits. That their goals there are always to make money. And I recall that many of these arguments were being made as the internet was coming on board, that the internet was like this wild west, a new frontier, and they're going to need new laws, but they didn't know what they were going to be because they didn't know how the internet was going to operate. And like geographically, the laws of the land didn't necessarily apply to where the websites were. So like, the Cayman Islands or the Swiss bank accounts was the internet. The internet could be anywhere. And so I think that he was maybe digging into that atmosphere. Like, we don't know what to expect, how to regulate it. I guess you just have to have faith in the morality of people who are operating. But we know that they're rushing things, and we know that they're driven just by making money. So I guess that's to think that those are their only ambitions. And that they're being frivolous. Those are the three arguments. And I think when he describes the biotech world, he's describing John Hammond as well. These are he's the personification of that almost perfectly. I don't know, and we're kind of in that realm now with cryptocurrencies where it's still, I would say, broadly misunderstood by most, including me, and but out there and running around and with consequences. Like it sounds like people are losing quite a bit of money investing in these things. But at the same time, I guess it sounds like people are getting very rich too. I don't know. But when you get into a new realm like this, what is the best process by which you begin to provide the oversight or the regulations? Do you just listen to your heart, or like what's the best way to go about entering into these new worlds?
Yeah, well, I mean, I would have a point of view on that. It's probably different from most of your listeners. That I would say, either you should not regulate at all, or have a very light sort of regulatory touch on these things. I mean, I think it's interesting that Crichton is writing, just before the internet becomes a daily force in our lives, and yet he says in that introduction that biotechnology will have a greater effect on our daily lives than computers. Now, if we just think of the internet as an add-on to computers, to me, that seems obviously false right now. I mean, we do see a lot of stuff with biotech, and maybe some of the food in your kitchen. Maybe we'll go to the doctor and you'll get some medicine that's related to this, biotech stuff. But the internet, I mean, we're only having this conversation because of the internet. The medium of podcasts only exists because of the internet. I don't know about you, but I feel like with us, almost every day a box shows up at the door. We got our toilet paper and our dish soap from Amazon now because it's so easy to just subscribe and they deliver it once a month or whatever we need. So Crichton is expressing, first of all, this prediction about the impact of biotechnology being greater than computers, which I think is wrong. He also, I think writes Jurassic Park as a bit of a warning, perhaps, about the problems that these fields are unregulated. I don't know a lot about the specific regulations about biotechnology. I mean, it seems to me that it is probably a field with a lot of regulations, but in some ways, maybe not. And yet, I don't think Crichton's fears have sort of come to pass. I don't want to get into conspiracy theories, but I think there's a chance that COVID is a lab leak from China. Not to say that it's probable. It's entirely possible that we will never know for sure either way. If we ever do know, then I think it will be some time before that comes to light. But it's at least a possibility. And if it is the case, then it was not a lab leak from some private company that was irresponsibly doing something. It was a lab leak that was under the supervision of the biggest government, one of the biggest governments in the world, right? So the idea that we will have these horrible consequences if we don't have enough regulations on biotech, I would just, if Crichton was still alive, to ask him, I would be interested to say, do you think you were wrong about your prediction? Because I look around and I don't see any disastrous consequences coming from biotech. I mean, we've got New foods that can be very important. Some cases when it comes to farming, some are a bit frivolous. You can buy these like grapes that taste like cotton candy at the store right now, which seems strange to me.
I haven't tried those.
Probably biotech involved in there somewhere. But I would describe most biotech that I see as either very beneficial or sort of neutral. And I'm just not aware. Maybe of examples of cases where this has gone wrong. I don't.
The only thing I can think of, I think there's a risk. I suppose, like in the analog of a viral leak, that something could escape a lab and affect the food supply or affect extinct a species and disrupt the food chain, or be very contagious and harm a lot of people. So I suppose that there's some possibilities, but it seems like people got take proper precautions. That the responsibility of handling these things isn't being taken whimsically. Even if the concept of what you're doing may have been whimsical, it seems like people are pretty strict about the consequences of being responsible. It feels that way. And it seems like there's the taboo that you don't clone people. That seems to be the one thing that they've just universally, unless there's some Cayman Island where the rules don't apply and they have a bunch of cloned people over there, I don't know. But that seems to be one that the world has agreed. If we start cloning things, we're not going to clone people.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Like we can imagine things that would go bad, right? Someone's messing around with viruses. Seem like a very obvious candidate now. Something gets out, something goes wrong, and yet it hasn't happened. And this is something that I see a lot of times in government regulations. A government will pass a regulation or a law, and they will say, "Well, we're doing this in case this bad thing happens." Which can be reasonable, but we should always be acknowledging the cost of these laws and regulations, and thinking, okay, is there a danger that the bad thing might happen, or is this just something that we're sort of imagining? Which I don't think we do. I don't think we do enough. To give one example, and perhaps a fairly minor one. But it's back to school season recently. You probably saw Facebook friends. Maybe you did this with your child holding a sign that says, "I'm this year's old. I'm in grade whatever at this school. These are the things I like." And some police departments were posting a warning about doing this and saying, an abductor could use this information to find your child and then take their love of dinosaurs to lure them into the van and abduct them, right? And we can imagine that might happen. But I look at that and my first thought is has this ever happened? Because almost all child abductions are non-custodial parents. People, and sometimes there are tragic results. But overwhelmingly, when a child is kidnapped, it's because someone who loves them doesn't get to see them as much as they want to because of a relationship that's fallen apart. And they just want to spend time with their children. So in a world where children are being kidnapped as a result of back-to-school posts, then maybe we pass an advisory. Maybe there's even a regulation that says you can't make back-to-school posts anymore because they're so dangerous. But I don't think we live in that world. No. I've never actually read about a case where a child was abducted in that manner.
Let's hope that doesn't happen. But yeah, I recall too, put your kids' names on everything so that when they can get it back, if they ever drop it somewhere. But also don't put their name available so people can see it because they get abducted. So it's a bit of both, right? Which that sounds like laws to me. They always seem to say one thing and not another, which I guess keeps lawyers very rich. I feel like we've moved out of a world where it used to be, buyer beware, do your research, take a lot of information, compare notes and stuff like that, get the reputation of a business before you buy anything, buyer beware. Whereas it seems like now you buy it and you expect that it's going to be exactly what you want, and you don't feel like it's possibly not going to be any good unless you get it from the dollar store, and you're like, it's just a dollar store, what do you expect? But we even got the Consumer Report segments on the news where somebody did them dirty, and the guy gets with a microphone and he's like, open your door and talk to me about this problem. And we have the snitch line at the Better Business Bureau. Consuming, buying, purchasing, is it regulations that have changed it into that, or have people just got more faith in the system, or the means of production has changed? What do you suppose is the reason that we've moved away from the snake oil salesman to I expect I'm getting a exactly what I want when I buy something.
Yeah, I think there's a accurate description there that a lot of things that at one point we would have done ourselves or belonged to some sort of group or association to do, we now look to government to do. And sometimes that means we don't pay enough attention as the way that we should, because we think that this will be handled by regulation. I think a lot of times it leads to us getting sort of substandard things. So, you and I have lived our entire lives in a society in which healthcare is provided for by the government. Almost all education is provided by the government. There's a very large degree of, social safety net, welfare provided by the government. There's also a large dissatisfaction with how these things are done, especially now. If we look at the past 2 years of the pandemic, you can hardly pick up a newspaper if you were so old-fashioned that you would pick up a newspaper without reading about problems in the healthcare system, problems in education, with the parents unhappy with how the schools are treating the pandemic, or how the teachers are unhappy, complaints that the social payments that are made to people who can't work are not appropriate, not enough, not keeping up with inflation, going to the wrong people, whatever it is. And yet I think that there's a general sort of societal attitude, well, that's the way things are. The government has to do these things. Also, they don't do a very good job, but what could we possibly do about it? And as a libertarian, to me, this is kind of frustrating, because this is my embodiment of the complaints, right? Mm-hmm. The reason I don't want education and healthcare run by the government is not because I don't want poor people to have them. It's because I believe everybody would get more and better of those things if we took them out of government hands. Mm-hmm. And there was a time, when these things were done without government. Education and healthcare existed before the state provided them. Though I think for many of us, it's hard to imagine how that could be the case. And then this extends to things like consumer goods and regulations. We just imagine that everything is being checked out, and they wouldn't allow them to sell it to us if it wasn't safe. Sometimes that's true. Sometimes that's not true. There's a journalist named John Stossel, who some people may know. He was on 2020 for a number of years. And he was an award-winning consumer reporter, made his reputation by dropping off a TV that was not broken. Again, very old-fashioned concept. Right. The idea of taking a TV to a repairman to fix. But they would take a working TV, they would drop it off, they'd come and pick it up, and the repair guy would say, yeah, I had to fix the whatever it was. You got to pay me $75. And they did this to 10 TV repair stores around town, and then went to confront them on camera about lying about how they fixed the TV. And Stossel got so famous and well known for doing this that he would get calls the week after one of his specials aired by politicians. He's an American, so usually Congress people, say, I'm horrified by these unscrupulous TV repairmen, and so we're going to pass a regulation to monitor TV repair industry. And what Stossel noticed was that you never got rid of the scam artists. You pass these regulations, now the honest TV repair people have to get licensed or have government inspections or whatever it is, and then the guys who are scammers just move on to a new scam. And so the regulations are never able to accomplish their stated goals, and we just pile up more and more of these as we go along the way. It was a very long answer to your question.
They never seem to take laws away, do they? They never seem to take anything back. You still can't drag a dead mule down Yonge Street on Sunday or something like that.
Exactly.
Because what? They're going to suddenly let people do that now? Can't take that rule out. So we do get Hammond evading the government as best as he can. That's why he sets up on a leased island outside the coast of Costa Rica. But the EPA is still interested in catching him. I mean, we know the EPA is the villains of Ghostbusters, and the villain in the Simpsons movie. The Environmental Protection Agency is a curse on the American working man, and probably other 80s movies as well. So they were concerned. There's, quote, no evidence of Hammond doing any wrong. They're just suspicious, and so they're snooping after him. But they're pretty clear that he's, quote, evading the law, and there must be military concerns. Why else would he need supercomputers and gene sequences or sophisticated things like that? So They believe that these things are all dangerous in the wrong hands, and so the government is going to go and decide that whether his hands are wrong or not. And for what it's worth, like them snooping around did in a way get the security report to be, I guess, moving along. So Gennaro brings all the inspectors to the island to do the safety inspection. Sort of, this kind of pressed their hand to do it. So I guess there was something good being done there. But like, in a world where a guy's doing something recklessly, if it's not the government that's looking over him, what is the best function of assembling watchdogs or things like that when there is a concern that should, be addressed?
Yeah, the watchdog, one is going to be tricky, right? Now, maybe you should have some sort of industry group, Cloners International or something. They would have a big conference, and they would have some sort of self-governing body. One thing I think is probably important to mention that is, as a libertarian, my position is not that if we take away the regulations, everything will work perfectly and there'll never be any problems. There will still, of course, we live in a world of imperfect humans, and there will be problems. The sort of question is, well, did the EPA really, make things better? Is there a system that would be effective at providing some sort of oversight or governance? And maybe the most effective oversight in Hammond's case is investors. Mm-hmm. They are now they seem to be sort of triggered by the investigations of the EPA. Mm-hmm. But perhaps that the lawyers, the investors who are getting nervous is the oversight. And you mentioned sort of experimentation a while ago, and I drew the analogy of failed businesses. Mm-hmm. And I will say that in Hammond's case, it's very largely the fact that it goes wrong, but he pays the ultimate price in the book, mm-hmm. right? He is hoist on his own petard, I think is the line from Shakespeare, that his horrible experiment gone awry. Yes, it hurts and kills other people, but also he is the victim mm-hmm. of it. Maybe that is sort of the at least in a literary sense, the appropriate outcome. That he is the victim of his own hubris.
Mm-hmm. That's true. He does get there is some poetic justice there, and Crichton makes sure that you read it that way, because just before he meets his end, he's doubling down. He's like, I'm going to build another. No, I'll build 3 more, and I'm going to have better people. Everybody I had sucked. Yeah. I could be even richer. And then he gets eaten. So Crichton
he hasn't learned his lesson, right? And it's, he's a fictional character, so I don't think we can say whether that is realistic or not, because that's just part of who he is in the novel. Mm-hmm. But I will say, in a sort of real world, sort of entrepreneurial sense, you have people who make a mistake and then they make the mistake 5 more times. Mm-hmm. And those people just tend not to be successful. The entrepreneurs that we know, look at Steve Jobs, all the mistakes that he made with Apple, and yet I just learned from them in some way to make Apple into one of the biggest companies in the world. I was once at a conference, and Jimmy Wales, I think is his name, the guy who started Wikipedia, talks, and Wikipedia is a very sort of, in a sense, thing that Hayek would have approved of, this sort of spontaneous order of just letting thousands of people write down their thoughts. And you might think, no, we need experts to say what should be in there. But it turns out you got a pretty good product, not a perfect product, but a pretty good product by just sort of crowdsourcing mm-hmm. this thing. But before Wikipedia, Jimmy Wales had a similar project in which he would pay experts to write these things. Mm-hmm. And apparently he would pay $10,000 for someone to write, the entry on Dinosaurs or something like that. It was a complete failure. But he claimed that he kept these entries that he had commissioned in his nightstand so we could read them every day in an attempt to get back some of the money that he had spent on them. I don't know if that was true or just a funny story, but it was a funny story.
I've read Jurassic Park a lot of times, but I don't think $10,000 worth of times. You have to read those every night, I think, for a while.
Yeah.
So we see that Hammond, again, leaves the States to escape the rules and the oversights. Do you think that that's happening a lot? We hear about brain drain, where people are lured away because they aren't getting what they need. or would they feel what they should get? Do you find that there are a lot of people that are escaping? Like, is it just monetary, or are there regulations you think that are stopping people, maybe moving businesses away? It sounds like taxation is the major factor that leads people away, but are there other rules and regulations? I know, what did I just hear? I was reading, so Harvard won a lawsuit to patent cancer, especially cancerous mouse called the oncomouse. They developed a mouse that gets cancer, and so they can test cancer stuff on it. And they patented, I can't say that word, the mouse. And the U.S. let them, but Canada doesn't let them in. So they can't do that research in Canada for some reason. So they said the animal itself can't be, you can patent the process and the methodology, but the animal itself is not a product. You can't do that. So Canada didn't let them do it. Are there examples where people are moving away because regulations are stopping them from doing things? I suppose like labor laws, maybe?
Yeah. I'd say we see this all the time, right? Anytime a company sets up a business somewhere, especially something like Amazon, where a few years ago we saw them building this great big secondary headquarters, and all the governments were falling all over themselves to give them tax breaks and things like that, which I would certainly not support. But that is a result of companies will look at where to go. People look at where to go. Taxes, like you say, are going to be a big thing. Regulations are definitely going to impact things. Look at the cannabis industry, which exploded a few years ago. It was in Canada, not in the U.S., because you couldn't legally grow cannabis.
That's right.
In the U.S. I think now maybe you can in some states, although it's still federally illegal. So maybe you can't.
Yeah,
I'm actually not sure.
Some states, yes, but I don't think you can cross the border. There's a bunch. Yeah, it's still complicated.
yeah, and one other example of that would be the fact that when my dad moved to Canada in 1976, Montreal was the business capital of Canada, the biggest city in Canada, and businesses fled there not so much because of taxes and regulations, but because of political uncertainty that Quebec was going to separate. And if Quebec separated, Royal Bank still wanted to be in Canada, not in some other country. So of course they kept branches in Montreal and Quebec, but they moved their headquarters to Toronto, as many big corporations did. So yeah, people will always, economists will say people respond to incentives. So corporations are just sort of masses of people, and they will respond to laws, regulations, incentives of any sort, and you can never get away from that.
That's so fascinating. The episode of the podcast that just came out this morning, The Curious Task, I forget the name of your great guest, but he was talking about how businesses and the economy sort of serve as a representation of people. It's fascinating. Businesses represent kind of a macro perspective on the behavior of people. So what they buy and how they spend their money and stuff like that shows who they are in a way. And it connects so well with what exactly you're talking about. That these regulations and stuff like that change people, not just businesses. It's interesting.
Yep, absolutely, and that's there's this idea that you businesses or government can pass these laws and then they will just have the desired effect. And of course, they do not. I mentioned marijuana. I mean, drug policy is a great example of this. The fact when you make drugs illegal, you have all of these things. You bring criminals into the drug trade. You affect the types of drugs that are being produced. And any government regulation or law is going to affect people's behavior in some way.
So have you guys had, I don't know how famous this guy is, but it looks like he's been around for a long, long time. And I think that a lot of the concerns that Crichton employed writing this book were based on an economist named Jeremy Rifkin, who apparently is an advocate in the States who is really against the use of new biopatents and biotech in farming. And he founded the Foundation of Economic Trends and spearheaded a coalition of groups who feared that biotech would be, the end of the natural world. And when I looked him up, I thought he was just like some, like, I don't mean any disrespect, just an angry farmer who was like, you can't do this is my land. But he sounds like an extraordinarily well-organized economist who's published all kinds of stuff. And of course he is. Why would he be something other than that? So I feel like he was really worried about these new fields, and there must be a lot of anxiety for people who know that the scam artist is there, that they are just moving from one to the next, and you got to kind of like, I don't know, beat the rug to get them out of there. What's the safest way to enter into a new market? Or like you're right, with cannabis stores, they popped up fast, and people were whole hog right into that. Like, we have a small town, we might have 5 dispensaries in town. It's unbelievable. What's the safest way to enter into a new market or explore these? Is it just experimentation, or?
I would say yeah, and it's same here. I'm in Ottawa, and the number of cannabis stores, I can only think that there's going to be, I think it's already started, but seems like there needs to be a big correction in the market. Like, we have too many of these, right? But it's really interesting to me, the idea that, for most of our lives, cannabis was this drug that was so dangerous that we had to stop people from having it, and when people tried to sell it, they needed to be put in jail. Of course, that wasn't my belief as a libertarian, and it wasn't a lot of people's belief. But as a general society, that was the law, and a lot of people had that belief. And then all of a sudden it becomes a thing where, we need the provincial government to be buying and growing and selling cannabis, which of course they ended up doing a bad job of. And I would say this is, part of my concern, going back to things like regulation, that you have this industry where all of a sudden you go from banning it to having this, regulated, in some ways supported and subsidized kind of way. And I would lean much more to just let people do what they want to do, as long as they're not harming other people. So, people want to grow and sell marijuana, that's fine. Maybe you have a labeling requirement so people know what they're consuming. That doesn't seem unreasonable. Although there's going to be problems with how it's actually done, most likely. Things like Bitcoin, which I wish I'd gotten into when I first heard about it. I was at a conference with a Bitcoin ATM 10 years ago, and they were $30 a Bitcoin.
Oh, yeah?
But I also just didn't and still don't really understand how it works. So I missed making my fortune that way. There's a lot of talk about, sort of regulating Bitcoin. I don't know how that would work. But I just want to let people do the things that they want to do. So I know people who love Bitcoin and think it's the best thing in the world. I think they should be free to buy it. I know a lot of people who think it's a scam and have no interest in it. Of course, they should be free not to buy it and not to have it. And the idea that all of these things, the government needs to tell us what is safe, what is unsafe, what is a good investment, what is a bad investment. I'm just very cynical about it, as you would expect.
I think in NFTs, non-fungible, whatever there are, I don't get it. I guess it's very similar to Bitcoin, but it's a picture instead of a value.
I think it's a bit different. So without getting too wonky, the part of Bitcoin I do understand is that it solves the problem in which, when we use government currencies, the government can always print more money. And that's what we're seeing now with inflation, which we all thought was a relic of our youth, those of us who were of our age, and is now back. And Canada and the US have been pretty good about not printing too much money, but countries like Zimbabwe and Venezuela, huge problem. So Bitcoin solves that by making it so that no one has the ability to print more money. So I totally get the reasons that Bitcoin could be a good idea. And if I could send you some Bitcoin, and you could send me some Jurassic Park paraphernalia that you were selling, or whatever it was, it's a very easy way to transact. So I see what the point is. And because there's a limited supply, if it catches on at all and stays a thing, it could become very valuable. NFTs, I'm much more cynical on. I guess I see a small amount of collector value, right? Like, if you could get the NFT for the scene in Jurassic Park, whatever your favorite scene is, when the T-Rex looks in the car or something like that, right? I could imagine that you might pay a couple $100 for something, and then it's I don't know if you follow football at all. The Green Bay Packers are an unusual sports team in that they sell shares, and anyone can buy shares. They're owned by the community. You pay a couple $100 for a share in the Green Bay Packers, and it's largely meaningless, except you get to put it on a frame on your wall and say, I'm a part owner of an NFL team. And that's what it is. So I can imagine that you might pay a couple $100 to hang that picture of the T-Rex looking in the car on the wall and say, lots of people could print this image, but I own the authentic original image in some way, and that little, sequence of numbers at the bottom proves it. As a sort of gimmicky thing, I get it. But when I hear about NFTs selling for millions of dollars, I'm like, how would that ever be supported? So I don't want to make any bold predictions of Bitcoin, but I think it's at least possible that Bitcoin or another cryptocurrency does stick around over the long term. I cannot comprehend any way in which NFTs are anything more than, look back as a version of the tulip mania in Holland.
Right on. Well, I think we're just running out of time here. It's been awesome having you. I think the lawmakers in us now have decided that if we had just made it illegal to be eaten by a dinosaur, that it would have solved the problem. So coming out of Jurassic Park, I think we should now lobby to have it illegal to be eaten by a dinosaur, and therefore that crime will stop dinosaurs from eating us.
There we go. We should threaten stiff jail sentences and put the dinosaurs in jail.
Have you been eaten by a dinosaur? That's a crime. You're going to jail for that, buddy. A stiff sentence. All right.
I got to say, the idea of dinosaur jail, where all the dinosaurs who ate people, and we lock them in cages, and then Hammond's grandson is the warden of Jurassic jail. I think there's a movie in that.
Oh my goodness. You're right. It makes more sense than Dominion. Okay. Thank you so much for being a guest. It was wonderful having you and catching up again. This is awesome. I love the Curious Task. I hope everybody goes and takes a peek at it.
It was fun. Thanks for having me on. I enjoyed the excuse to read the novel, and I'm going to continue tuning into this podcast and getting my weekly dose of dinosaur news.
Well, that is more than I could have asked for. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ryan.
All right. See you, Matt. All right. A big thank you to Matt for coming on the podcast. Thanks, Matt. I really appreciate it. The text this week is another chapter called Control, spanning from pages 160 to 166. In a synopsis, park officials believe the eggshells are avian, whereas Grant and Malcolm agree they are dinosaur eggshells. To prove his point, Malcolm leads Wu through a series of data like Procompsognathus height charts and an overall animal count to demonstrate conclusively that multiple species are breeding in the park and have been for ages. Wu can't believe it and is terrified. If the animals are breeding, it calls into question every security measure they've put in place. Grant concludes that there are 7 nesting sites on the island. Characters. John Hammond. Hammond believes the dinosaur eggshell must be a bird egg at first, and is astonished when the dinosaur count reveals that there are more dinosaurs. He's outraged. His voice rises as Malcolm starts asking the computer to find more and more dinosaurs on 162, and it burns Hammond. He hates it that Malcolm has figured his park out in front of him. He tries to blame Nedry, but Nedry isn't to blame. He believes the animals can't breed, so the tally must be counting like field mice or something, but Hammond is so stubborn. When the tally reports an error because it's failed to find 300 animals, thus only 292, or dozens of new animals that are unknown to the park management, he somehow feels vindicated, if only for a moment, on 164. He's such a stubborn loser. Then after all the dinosaurs are shown to be breeding, and in fact there are dozens of wild raptors loose in the park, Hammond downplays it like, it's not that bad. He stupidly believes on 166 because there are mostly only small increases in a couple categories, so no big deal. Then, when Wu starts to freak out, Hammond flatly says, well, Henry, this is all your fault. It means you screwed up, he says on 166. Dr. Ian Malcolm. Malcolm is ready to explain himself after all this mystery surrounding his argument that the park is unsafe. Remember, Gennaro was upset with him because he wasn't being forthcoming. He asks for a computer tally of the Procompsognathus population and transmits the results onto the screen in the car on page 161. And he asks that they search for more than the 238 expected to be found in the park. Malcolm blows all their minds and flatly reports, now you see the flaw in your procedures on 164. You only track the expected number of dinosaurs. You were worried about losing animals, but your procedures were designed to advise you instantly if you had less than the expected number. But that wasn't the problem. The problem was you had more than the expected number. Wu won't accept the breeding argument, but Malcolm now has 3 data to refer to. Grant's eggshell, the population tally, and the Compy height graph. The Gaussian distribution shows a normal curve showing a natural population, when it should be a staggered graph showing 3 peaks because the population was introduced in 3 batches. The graph you got is a graph of a breeding population, summarizes Malcolm. John Arnold. Arnold transmits a record of all 238 dinosaurs in the park to Malcolm and says, quote, everything accounted for, as always, with satisfaction. He feels this proves that the dinosaurs are obviously not breeding, but as he begins to understand Malcolm's inquiry, he frowns. The gravity of their mistakes dawn on him. As the numbers tally upwards, Arnold catches on to the error of their ways. He admits they always assumed there were only 238 dinosaurs, and so they never looked for more. They were too worried about missing an animal, not gaining animals. Arnold still can't believe that the dinosaurs are breeding, though. He believes that there must be another explanation for the extra animals in the tally. They all believed that the dinosaurs just can't breed. Dr. Henry Wu. Wu tries to assuage Hammond to help him understand what's going on page 163. Wu assures everyone the dinosaurs cannot breed. Wu is in disbelief. He cannot accept that the animals are breeding on 164. Malcolm says, "I'm afraid so." And Wu says, "No." Staring at the data, he still can't see how his procedures have failed him, but he's beginning to accept that the breeding is true. Then Wu loses his cool, raising his voice by saying loudly, "Don't you know what this means?" on 166, as Wu realizes what Malcolm had been telling them all along. Either it's a mistake, as he hopes, or everything about the park has been called into question, and that horrifies him. Donald Gennaro. Gennaro curses at the rising figures of dinosaurs on page 163. Each new animal feels like a whole new failure. Lex. She begins to complain that she's hungry on 163, and her complaining is never not going to be awful. Robert Muldoon. He swears out loud when he learns that the raptors are free in the park on 166. Dr. Alan Grant. Upon reviewing the data, Grant offers his expertise thanks to his specialty as a dinosaur nesting phenom. Quote, "These numbers confirm that breeding is taking place in 7 different sites around the island on 166. Stylistic techniques. We have the italics. That's all it can be. Hammond wholly believes in the controls at Jurassic Park and can't imagine that they're failing. "What the hell is that?" he barks on 162. "And from where? I thought so." Hammond is proving to be huffy and emotive as he becomes more and more excitable. He began as a cheery fellow inviting everyone on this trip and is beginning to show his true colors. As the expression goes, conflict reveals character. All the animals in the park is emphasized, and the problem was you had more than the expected number. The emphasis illustrates where their failure has been all along. There's some exclamation. "Nedry!" exclamation. Have you screwed up again? Quickly looking to point blame at someone, Hammond has gotten himself worked up. He's furious at his park staff and perhaps even embarrassed. And even worse, embarrassed in front of Malcolm. Tension. The tension as the tally rises is pretty serious in this chapter. Crichton does an extraordinary job demonstrating how the preconceptions at the park, the assumptions, are all flawed, that their systems of control are unsatisfactory, and everything that's been believed about the safety and control of Jurassic Park is made worse with each new dinosaur that is counted in the tally. We're literally just watching a number rise, but the conflict, dialogue, and drama raise the stakes considerably. That Crichton draws this out over a few minutes, as Arnold said, allows us to spend more time worrying and wondering. Cursing. I guess we spend more time cursing, too. Hammond curses, Gennaro curses, Arnold curses. This is a big deal, and everyone is feeling the weight of the revelation. And then once it's revealed that the velociraptors are breeding, it's Muldoon's turn to curse. How else is one to express themselves, eh? Metatext. The Compy height graph clearly illustrates how the shape of the data indicate that the Compies live in a normal population, rather than an artificial population that was introduced in 3 batches. We get to read the graph rather than have a narrative about reading the graph, which is nice. I like when they include things for us to look at, instead of telling us that they're looking at things. Foreshadowing. Crichton shows that all sorts of animals are breeding, but it doesn't sound too serious. The Othnielia, the Maiasaura, the Hypsies. These are all mild-mannered herbivores, no problem. And then the velociraptors. That's a problem. And it's written like that, too. We have an M dash right there. The Procompsognathans are breeding, and so are the Othnielia, the Maiasaura, the Hypsies, M dash. And the velociraptors. Again, the final species is set apart from the rest, showing that this is the most consequential news yet to be revealed. Motifs. The illusion of control. The illusion of control comes tumbling down in this chapter, and it's terrific. Again, the idea that a hoax shows you what you expect to see is almost specifically referenced here. Nedry reveals that the, quote, computer allows the operator to enter the expected number of animals in order to make the counting process faster on 163. The word, quote, expected specifically links these 2 moments in the novel, both showing how control is the hoax being perpetrated here. Arnold confesses they made the assumption that there couldn't be more dinosaurs, so they didn't look for more. When the computer doesn't find 300 animals per the request, it flashes an error indicating something is wrong, but it's not that there aren't 300 animals to find, it's that the park has been out of control for months. Spielberg's 1993 film gives Ellie Sattler dialogue that spells this motif out about as clearly as possible. She says, "You never had control. That's the illusion. Now I was overwhelmed by the power of this place. Well, I made a mistake too. I didn't have enough respect for that power, and it's out now. And then she eats some ice cream. But you can see that motif definitely there. It was totally in the book, and it shows up a lot. Discussion. The dinosaurs. We get the complete list of all the dinosaurs at Jurassic Park. Tyrannosaurus, Maiasaura, Stegosaurus, Triceratops, Procompsognathus, Athnelia, Velociraptor, Apatosaurus, Hadrosaurus, Dilophosaurus, Pterosaurs, Hypsilophodons, Euoplocephalus, Styracosaurus, and Microceratops. There is a total of 238 animals to be expected in the park. And this is the total list, unless you got one of those fancy accidental versions of the manuscript that sneaks Colovosaurus onto the list in place of Microceratops, which I just can't understand how something like that happens. Child of the 80s. Transmitting a computer's results to the screen in the dash of the Land Cruiser is insane technology for the 80s. Is it being transmitted by radio signals? Seriously, how is this being done? Holy cow! I don't believe the park had Wi-Fi. Like, that wasn't a thing. This is astounding technology. In about 2 more chapters, they won't even be able to operate a walkie-talkie, but for now they can transmit data from one computer into a car. Perhaps Crichton misunderstood how CD-ROMs work, because this just doesn't hold water. I don't get how that works. But, yeah, that's just strange. Building a mystery. We get 2 new mysteries at Jurassic Park in this chapter. How does a population of entirely female animals begin to breed, and why are there small increases in the big animals, the Maiasaura and the Hypsies, but bigger increases in the small animals? It must be a mistake. And we'll probably get to the answers to that stuff in time as we go through the book. So, signing off today, I want to say thank you to my special guest, Executive Director of the Institute for Liberal Studies, Matt Bufton. It's so terrific to have him come on and join us. Thanks so much, Matt. Go check out that tune in Moana and let me know what you think. I want to sign off today thanking you for joining me. If you want to read along in the book and add some thoughts to what we've been discussing on the show, or be a guest on the show, and chat with me about anything you like about Jurassic Park, you can do that by connecting with me. I'm at ryansrogers@gmail.com. If you'd like to be a guest, you can drop me a line and we can try and set something up. We can rehash, tear down, gush over, and chit-chat about any part of the book, or also not the book, all you'd like. The Jurassic Park-Cast is part of the Spring Chickens banner of amateur intellectual properties, including the Spring Chickens Funny Pages, Tomb of the Undead graphic novel, the Second Lapse graphic novelettes, The Infantry, and the worst of them all, the King Street Capers. You can find links to all that baggage in the show notes or by visiting the schickens.blogspot.com or finding us on Facebook at facebook.com/springchickencapers. Or me, I'm on Twitter at RogersRyan22. Thank you dearly for tuning in to the Jurassic Park-Cast, the Jurassic Park podcast, where we talk about the novel Jurassic Park, and also not that too. Until next time.